So as you know, Dr. Vikas Baniwal is here with us today. All the participants who are here have already interacted with him. He is assistant professor at the Department of Education, University of Delhi, and he's general fellow at the Indian Council of Philosophical Research. And he's completed his doctoral studies also from the University of Delhi. From the Department of Education in 2015, and he has over a decade of teaching experience in schools and higher education. He has also worked in research and administration, and he has many publications to his credit on dialogue, intersubjectivity, inclusion, mental health, self, and identity. So over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. So today, I thought I should go from simpler ideas to more complicated ideas. So very poetically, I asked Behzad to think of forms and shades of dialogue. And it was a rainy day and I was standing outside looking at shades of green, actually. So that is how the idea came. So it's not a very conceptually chalked out title, but I think it has conceptual implications, and I'll bring them forth during the discussion. So the premise of today's interaction from my side is that there is no ideal form of dialogue. We can't say that this is the best form or idea of dialogue. At the most, one may speak of appropriateness, that in this context, this kind of dialogue is appropriate. And this idea of appropriateness then is based on the intent, context, people who are involved in the process, and the situation therein, the interpersonal, intrapersonal situation. So for me, dialogue is rooted in a lot of fluidity. It is not a way, it is not a method. So the word method comes from methodos, which means a path to walk on. So for me, dialogue is not a very clear path to walk on. Often it is walking in the uncharted territory. So that's the premise with which I will begin. So I will speak sometimes of dialogue and sometimes of dialogic and dialogical. Dialogue in that sense becomes a noun, that there is something out there which can be clearly named as dialogue, whereas dialogic is an adjective. So I teach in Department of Education, and often students are told that don't give lectures. The lectures are boring or lectures are very orthodox. But I have come to believe that in a lecture, if you are able to capture the lived reality, capture the fantasy, capture the imagination and the concerns of the participants, then it has this potential to become dialogical. So that is partly my attempt today as well. So even though it's in a more conventional setting, this is a monologue in which one person is speaking. But my attempt is that it should become dialogical at some point in time for you, that the person who's listening to the speaker feels that, yes, this is me, this is what I wanted to ask, and this is what I wanted to talk about, which is already being talked about. So that's the intent today here. Often, students in any beginning course in higher education are bombarded with key concepts and philosophies and names of philosophers. Today also you would be bombarded, but we will not begin with the bombardment. Rather, we would begin with some common shared concepts and then arrive at some thinkers and their key concepts. So even if you are not able to connect with right away with the thinkers and their key concepts, just keep a note of them, read about them later on, because the understanding of the session is not contingent upon you knowing about the thinkers. So don't worry about that. Okay, so with this backdrop, I would then begin. When I say that there are forms of dialogue, and as Irfan was highlighting, is it like form and content, something like that? So yeah, it is about form and content. So for example, there is a very interesting dialogue in um, in which a young student is being asked whether you know Pythagoras theorem or not. So this young student is a servant, young boy who has never gone to a school. So he says, no, I don't know. And in this dialogue, slowly and gradually, this young boy, Mino, is brought to the idea and the realization that no, you know Pythagoras theorem. And this process is happening very logically. So let me keep Mino aside for some time. Say I ask someone, do you know about dialogue? You may say, no, yeah, maybe a little bit. And then I would ask, okay, what do you understand by the word dialogue in general? You may say something. Come on, a participant, anyone, someone who thinks he doesn't know about dialogue.
Dialogue is a conversation between two
Okay,
persons.
very great. So, Wazir, if dialogue is conversation, then what is the difference between dialogue and conversation? They can't be the same.
Okay.
Try.
Yes, dialogue is to make things clear about each other.
Mhm. But that a conversation can also do.
Yep.
Someone else can also join in. Anyone? What do you think is the difference between conversation and dialogue?
I think dialogue means the
I can't hear you. Someone tried saying something.
I think we can just go one by one and see what each of the students feel is the difference between dialogue and conversation. I think that will be a really interesting.
You may raise your hands and then Ali, I can ask you one by one. But I don't need responses from everyone. I just want to call out the understanding from what you are saying and then tell you what did we do. Yeah.
Maybe in dialogue there is an inherent thing about progress, like making a progress. There is a dialectics involved, whereas in a conversation it can be just everyday thing. There is something about progress in dialogue. We learn by speaking, even if it is with ourselves.
Very interesting, Imran. Then can we have dialogue with animals ever?
Well, they don't have language, but they don't have a spoken language. But other language maybe they have.
But then there won't be a progress, the notion of progress. There won't be a dialectic.
Yeah, they won't be that.
Yeah. And also this brings in another new element, dialectic. So let's leave that aside. What is the difference between, again, dialogue and conversation? Is every conversation dialogue or is every dialogue conversation? Think, anyone?
I see both of they are synonymous.
Okay. So you and I, if we are conversing, does that mean that we are having dialogue?
Yeah, it's a dialogue.
So there is
And we can converse about anything.
yeah. So there is a thinker who differentiates between a dialogue and a duologue. He would say that this is a duologue at the most right now, where there are two people talking to each other. So yes, it's a conversation, but it may not necessarily be a dialogue.
That's a very interesting take, Dr. Baniwal. But Ayanda would like to add
Yep.
something to this dialogue.
Thank you. I think it differs with the context. These terms, they are actually used interchangeably. The one of dialogue, I think it becomes appropriate when we are actually discussing a certain concept, whereas a conversation, then it's where we share ideas about a particular matter.
You have taken us out of one situation and put in another. If you have
Hello?
clarified, you have tried to clarify discussion and dialogue, but took us to discussion. So conversation, now we have three concepts: conversations, discussions, and dialogue. And Imran took us to the
I
fourth.
would say dialogue, yeah. I would say dialogue is a conversation with people, with at least two or more people, on a particular issue to get a better understanding of what is being discussed or about each other.
But that's also discussion.
Okay.
Okay, so let me leave you with this confusion, and I will come back to it at the end of the session and remind me, Alia, if I do not. So
Okay.
this kind of a discussion, this kind of a conversation, in which is very rational, in which questions are being posed, in which positions are being taken, where the attempt is to find a definition which has a universalistic nature. Now, this kind of conversation is called dialogue by Socrates. So the person I was referring to was Socrates, whom you would find in the book, the compilation which was written by Plato, called Dialogues. And the name of the dialogue is Meno, in which it is shown that knowledge is already in us. And if we ask the right questions, then the knowledge gets expressed. It is retrieved from the person. So knowledge is not something which is gained from outside. That's the assumption of Platonic dialogues. And Socrates, or the dialoguer or the teacher, is then a sort of a midwife who helps the student to retrieve that knowledge from his or her own self. Now, a similar position is taken in Upanishadic dialogues. So, for example, there is a very popular dialogue about Nachiketa, in which this young boy is offered to death, and then he is standing at the gate of the god of death, and then he is blessed with three boons, and he asks, "Tell me what is beyond death." And the god of death tells him, no, don't ask such stupid questions. These are too difficult for a young boy. Why don't you ask for life, money, prosperity, position? But this boy is steadfast. No, I want to have this knowledge. Now, this is quite a different position, even though in both there is a young teacher, a young student, and an aged, realized teacher. But in one, the teacher is helping to retrieve knowledge from the consciousness or from the self of the student. Whereas in the other, the knowledge is being bestowed upon the student. So Imran, that is what I meant by form and content, how they both are important. In both, the content is about knowledge, about something supreme, something universal. But the form is different. in which in one the questions are being asked to help the student realize his or her knowledge. In the other, knowledge is being bestowed, but the attempt is also, in the final intent is to realize your own self. That's the difference between the two. So this idea of dialogue, this form of dialogue, where people engage in rational questions, which may or may not be rooted in certain assumptions, are different. For example, in Socratic dialogue, you can question the assumptions. So, for example, there is a dialogue in which the conversation begins that a man is going to file a lawsuit against his parents, that they are not doing the virtuous thing. And then Socrates asks, what do you think is virtue? And the conversation begins from there. So a very small starting point, but which has deep assumptions. But they are not always spiritual assumptions. Whereas in the Upanishadic dialogues, the assumptions are generally spiritual, even though they may also begin with small things. There's a very interesting dialogue in Brihadrayanak, Upanishad. I'm forgetting the pronunciation. Brihad Aranyak Upanishads. So there, the young boy is sent to the forest with a lot of cattle, and he's told that they should become 300 and you should come back only then. And the boy gains knowledge in the forest within those animals. So such examples highlight how knowledge can be gained anywhere, but you have to be a worthy student to gain that knowledge. This is a major assumption in Upanishads. Whereas in Socratic dialogue, there are no such assumptions. Because anybody can do reason. So if you can reason, you can have dialogue. So just give me a second. Yeah. So that is next. Now, very interestingly, since he is here, there is a whole movement called Philosophy for Children, which follows this Socratic appeal to reason. And they argue that even children can have dialogue once they develop language. So that is an applied part of this conception of dialogue, where reason and critical questioning are important. Now, there are multiple forms of dialogue. For example, what do you do when you are in a huge meeting? Or say when you are a speaker in front of, say, a large audience? Would that be dialogue? There are no two parties discussing. You are on the stage. So for example, I am right now here in a class. Can I say that I have dialogue when I'm not asked? I mean, not ask the participants to participate, to ask questions. So, and then what do politicians do when they speak with a mic in front of a huge audience? What do these news anchors do who shout at the top of their voice? Is that dialogue? Can it be called dialogue in any way? They may claim that they are very critical, and sometimes they confuse shouting with being critical. But can it be understood as dialogue? Can we argue that it is not dialogue? Yeah, Mohammed has some ideas. Come on.
No, sir, no.
Okay. So, yeah, I think he related with the questions that I was raising. So, a very interesting thinker who talks about this idea of dialogue in a public sphere is Habermas. So he speaks of dialogue as communicative action. That when we communicate, when we engage in a public sphere, then we have a moral responsibility. Then that action, that communication is itself an action, and it cannot and should not lead to propaganda and indoctrination. So that's a very powerful conception, political, socio-political conception of dialogue, where there are implied ethics. So even though the form may not be like that of Socrates, the audience may not be so unique and particular, but there are certain norms. So when you look at TV channels, news channels, and these mediators who interview political personalities, always ask yourself this question, that is this mediator, is this person talking logically? One, is this person talking from a particular vantage point? Is he trying to do propaganda or is only analyzing? Is there a bias? Is there a responsibility? So it may be a good idea to learn which news channel is being owned by which company, which political party, or which industrialist. So that will give you some clue about the transparency, neutrality, and responsibility of media channels and media houses. Yeah. Similarly, there is another thinker who says that, people should not have one opinion. Generally, the political outcry is that, oh, there is so much of diversity, oh, there is so much of difference of opinion, and we are not able to arrive at a common shared position. And this person would say, good that we don't have one position. Because if there is one position, then we all will do the same thing. And if then there are only few people who speak in a different voice, then they will not get any position. They will not be heard. They will be suppressed. So this person, this philosopher, Bakhtin, talks about carnival, that, a culture of diversity should be like a carnival, where everyone is free to express his or her uniqueness, his or her individuality, difference, and it should be accepted. So rather than a monologue or a single voice, he talks about polyphony, that there should be multiple voices, there should be a polarity, a polyphony of a multiplicity of voices. And with this emphasis on giving importance to the lone voice, to the one voice which is right there, the student sitting in the corner, or the minority which is silent, comes this notion of otherness. So the question of dialogue is centrally about the question of otherness. How do we engage with the other? You have it, Bitu. So for Socrates, we engage with the other with reason. With Habermas, we engage with a socio-political awareness. With Bakhtin, we engage with our own individualities, which are not intended to become one with the other. And this is probably the difference between dialogue and dialectic. In a dialectic, there is a thesis, there is an antithesis, and there is a synthesis. Now, in Hegel's idea of dialectic, it begins with self, and then it goes to the other, and ultimately merges into the truth, the higher absolute. But not in dialogue, not in polyphony. The way Bakhtin, the way, and there are more thinkers like Bakhtin, I'll come to them. The way these thinkers engage with the other is that they say, no, please let the other be. The other is radically other. For example, a man and a woman, or any other gender that you identify with, or a child and an adult. We can never be one. A child is a child. A woman is a woman. A man is a man. A person from different religion, caste, class belongs to that identity, lives that identity. So you cannot assume, integrate, appropriate, incorporate the other into yourself. And that's the problem with the idea of mainstreaming, with the idea of bringing people to the larger ethos and the umbrella of the majority politics. So people like Bakhtin question this homogenizing attempt by arguing, no, let the other voices be other and give them equal space. And probably that's what is central to democracy as well. Similarly, there is another thinker who, by the name of Freire. So Freire talks about the importance of conscientization, consciousness raising. He says that all hierarchies lead to modification in consciousness. Yeah, Paulo Freire, he's a Brazilian. He was a Brazilian philosopher. No, Brazilian? Yeah, no, yeah, I think so. I may be mistaken.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Brazilian.
Freire, Freire. Yeah. So Freire highlights that hierarchies, domination, they lead to modifying the consciousness of the people who are oppressed, who are dominated. The name of his magnum opus, or one of the most important books, is called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. That how we can teach people who are oppressed to not be oppressed, to realize their own oppression, and through dialogue become liberated, become human again. And his argument is that both oppressor and the oppressed are dehumanized. The one who oppresses others is equally dehumanized. If I put it in simple terms, have you ever seen a boy or a man hitting an animal and the animal crying? What would you say? The person beating an animal, is that person human or not? No, because somewhere you assume that the value of other people's or other animals' hurt, pain, or giving dignity to their existence is being human. This is the same argument that Freire uses. The person who dominates, who oppresses others, is not human. Because by virtue of oppressing others, they are, to do that, they first have to kill some part of their own humanity. And of course, the person who is being humanized is already objectified and dehumanized. The person who is being oppressed. So again, the ethic is very important here. How do we engage with this otherness? And it's not just with people. There was this philosopher Gadamer who talked about otherness of the text, written text. That even when you read writings of someone, you are engaging with an otherness. And there are possibilities of interpretation. Is hermeneutics. And this idea of hermeneutics comes from biblical studies. So interpreting religious texts is not something which is new. But yes, it is a recent trend to demonize alternative interpretations of written texts. But someone may have a very beautiful dialogue with the written text. Probably that is why there are so many versions of Bible. Maybe those authors had a dialogue, though those words spoke to them metaphorically. And that's why there are differences. So, and then not just in socio-political or written word. There are philosophers like Martin Buber who talk of dialogue as dialogue with even with the divine. That Buber posits that there are three. He categorizes the world, living world, into three aspects. So other people, nature, which includes animals, and divine beings. So Buber is very spiritual, and he is involving the idea of divine beings within the purview of dialogue. Buber, Martin Buber. You will get maybe a list of these thinkers, and I'll give you a reading. I didn't give it before because then you might have stayed with the thinkers, and the feel of engaging with their ideas might have been lost. So this philosopher Martin Buber says every thou becomes an it. So imagine a young baby. So when you have a young baby and you play with the baby, you don't want the baby to be hurt, no matter what cost. So there is a huge possibility he might start yelling right now, and it would take Behzad a lot of efforts to cut and edit the video to upload on YouTube. But you can't think of hurting his feelings and making him cry. But after a while, when he will grow up or when he will start yelling at each and everything, probably I will stop focusing on his yelling. So just like a gift which you got when you were young, you held it for quite a long time, but then it became not so important. So Buber says every thou becomes an it. But he also says that every it has the potential to become thou. So you can make every common object an object of admiration, of wonder, of dialogue. So you can have a dialogue with a pen. I mean, we often hear voices of our parents, of our teachers when we do something, no? Of course, psychoanalysis would explain it as internalization. But again, it's you who is giving importance to that voice. So the last thinker that I would like to mention here is Levinas. So what Levinas argues is that be humbled in the presence of the other. The other cannot be captured in the self, within the self. The other is beyond and above me. So it's like me trying to understand what is going on in his mind right now. Levinas would say, shut up, don't even try it. He is another, be respectful to him, and let him reveal himself to you, rather than try to dissect or interpret or psychologize or do whatever you adults do for children or to children. It's the same idea when you go for an ethnography or when you go for a qualitative study. So let the other participants reveal themselves to you. It's not a very hard and fast planned way in which you can get to know others. And even that knowing, that claim of knowledge has to be with humility. Because the other is another. There is always an unbridgeable gap between you and the other. So no matter how much you claim to know the other, every claim of knowledge is transgression. It's like you telling your friend, oh, I know you, and your friend telling you, actually, you don't. So that humility which comes with the possibility of not knowing, of realizing that the other is more than what you make of the other. Krishnamurti interestingly puts this. He would say that you don't really talk to people. You talk to the image that you have constructed of that person in your mind. And the other person is also not talking to you. The other person is talking to you the image that he or she has constructed of you in their minds. So actually, it's these two images talking to each other. So that's not genuine conversation or dialogue. That's just projection or, fitting people into the frames that you have created. So for me, personally, I largely subscribe to Buber, but I really agree with Levinas's ethical stance that to engage with another is always a normative ethical process. So we need to understand where are we located, and we need to understand that others are located in their own cortex. But what Buber would tell you is that there are certain moments in which those limited identities get dissolved. And in those moments, dialogue happen. So for Buber, there are dialogic moments which happen when they happen. So you can be open to dialogue, but you cannot ensure dialogue. So yeah, I think I would take a pause now, and if you have any feedback, any questions, I'm here.
Anyone who has any questions may just raise their hand on this app, and I will call your name one by one. Otherwise, we will proceed. So you're explaining it too well. Nobody has any questions. Or maybe they're concentrating on your baby. It could be either one of them.
That's quite possible.
Hello.
Yes, Akanksha, go ahead.
Yeah. Just a second. Yeah. So it's not a question, but it's a comment. Like as you shared that we need to engage with the others. So I was reading something, so it was coming from there. So for me, it's like we need to travel to their world. Like we have a world in us, and we need to travel from our world to their world to engage. In a concept of dialogue. So in conversation, we can just establish, we can just talk and to be in our place. But for me, it could be wrong, but it's my understanding to establish or to form a dialogue conversational. We need to travel to our world, to their world to engage with the other. And one more thing I just need to point out, like this, the otherness. For me, as I'm working in the field of environmental ethics, so for me, it's not limited to the human being or, as you have said, that the scriptures or the books or text. For me, the otherness, as we provided to the environment, that's why the degradation happens. Because we start understanding them in a form of no, we are have intellect, we are human beings have this intellectual analysis power, so we are over and above, and we can just suppress them, oppress them. So there for me, in not only with the human or the textual understanding, for me their dialogue plays a very important role. Like we need to be in a dialogue with the non-human things as well. So that's
Absolutely.
what my understanding I just wanted to share.
I totally agree with you, and I'll begin with the second part and then come to the first. Martin Buber is exactly highlighting this, that this non-human world dialogue is there as well. And in ecological ethics, this position has become quite prominent against the anthropocentric position that you talked about, that humans are the most evolved and they have the freedom and choice to exploit the non-human environment and beings for their own gains. So I totally agree with you. So both Buber and Levinasian ethics are applicable there. And the first part, that when you say, when you use this metaphor of traveling, it's a very beautiful metaphor.
Yes.
Yeah. But the caution there is just that we can never live in the world in which we have traveled like the person who is living there. Then the question of embodiment comes in. So let me put it differently. Even if there are twins, no matter, even if bodily they have common genes, but still the way they interpret, they experience the world is different. So it's not just about us being able to. So I'm making 2 points here. One, even if bodies are same, experiences are different. And second, even if we try to make sense of the experiences, bodies negotiate and mediate the experiences that we have. It's like trying to watch a game. So different people of different heights trying to watch what is happening out there. So people who are taller will be able to see more, and people who are shorter will not be. So this embodiment, similarly, male and female bodies, how they mediate our experiences. So this idea of embodiment has become quite central. Yeah, Rashmi.
Yes, yes. That embodiment actually the places where we form this dialogue. Thank you, thank you.
Akansha, I couldn't hear you.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
Alia?
I'm sorry, actually today it's raining heavily and I just lost my connection.
You can message in the chat.
Sure.
Okay,
Thank you,
Rashmi is
sir.
next.
Yeah, so my question is very direct. How do we then understand empathy, and how do we empathize when in the context of embodiment and experiences, and that you just mentioned about, that Jiddu Krishnamurti's image exchange, like we actually reciprocate to the imageries that we create of another. How do we really then empathize, and then how does it work? Thank you.
So the answers would be multiple. Krishnamurti would say that you have to look at the person without any judgment. So what he would call as choiceless awareness. Whereas Buber would say that you will experience what the other person experiences within that dialogic moment. Levinas would say you can't. It's impossible. So empathy is not possible. There can be some shared experience, but you can never actually step into the other person's shoes because they will always fit differently to you. So yeah, theorists like Freire would highlight the shared identities. So yes, empathy can be there if you share the identity. So for example, I often ask this question, can a man be a feminist author? Or can a privileged write about the struggles of the marginalized? Can a majority talk about the pains and struggles of a minority? So this is exactly the ethical dilemma that we arrive at, or predicament. That even though you, in all your honesty, you want to talk about the other, but since you are not the other, your voice or your position will always be less valid than those who have actually lived it.
just a small comment, like it's recall me the Husserl's understanding of this. Like he said, when we try to explain anything, we just need to be, uh, we need to suspend our prejudices or our things. And in a similar manner, when I'm just not getting his name, but he said like the veil of ignorance.
Yeah, John
I just
Rawls.
forget.
Rawls.
John Rawls.
Yeah.
So it reminds me that, yeah, that's a very similar thing.
Yeah, definitely. See, the idea is that when when you belong to a particular socio-political identity marker, then it's very difficult to have a position which is absolutely neutral. So people like Rawls want you to have a neutral position, whereas people like Levinas will tell you no position can ever be neutral. So dialogue takes these many forms. So one of the objectives that I had today was that from now on, if you are in a situation where people are claiming that this is dialogue, you should be able to pinpoint, okay, this is their assumption and this is the kind of dialogue that they are talking about. For example, uh, what do people do when they negotiate treaties, international treaties? They call it dialogue. So which kind of dialogue it is? Or which form will it take? There will be negotiations. There will be compromises. It's clearly not spiritual. It's clearly not about, say, Krishnamurti's choiceless awareness. It's not as rational as Socrates would want you to be. So this is the kind of reflection I hope you will have from now on. Which kind of dialogue it is and which kind of dialogue it is not. I won't give you answer to that question also. Yeah. Anyone else?
So, Alia, can I go ahead? I just wanted to cite one example of, this dialogue between inanimate object and object. So there is an excellent novel called My Name is Red by Orhan Pamuk. And that book is an epitome of basically, that how can we really engage with something, that we ourselves give meaning to everything around us, including animated objects. So, whether human beings are objects or subjects, and we are in objectified world or a subjectified world is a challenge and a dilemma, I think.
Absolutely.
So I think that book is an excellent example, I personally think.
Yeah, definitely. There is a parallel book in mathematics also. Mr. God, this is Anna. So Anna is a young girl who talks to God and talks about mathematics in language of of God. That mathematics is the language of God.
Anybody else who have any questions?
No one. Okay. So let me brainstorm with you a little more and puzzle you a little more. Can we write dialogically? Mohammed, you are muted. Can we write dialogically? Yeah. Kulsum.
Is it you mean like how Plato wrote Socrates things in a dialogical form?
Yeah, the form is dialogue, but someone may read it like any other. Often people in philosophy, when they are given the task to read Platonic dialogues, I'm sure they don't enjoy it.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I have this philosophy background.
So would you call that dialogical? Or is the form dialogical and or form is conversational and it may become dialogue for you? Kulsum.
There are certain books, I believe, that are considered to be dialogic. And like you spoke of Bakhtin and the idea of polyphony. So polyphonic writing often is about including a lot of multiplicity of voices. And I think when we studied Bakhtin, we also studied the concept of carnivalesque writing.
Absolutely.
And so that was including a number of different voices. So I think if you can have carnivalesque writing, which is, I think Bakhtin wrote certain books about, he explored the idea of writing dialogically in the works of Dostoevsky.
Yes.
So that he believed was dialogic writing. So I think that is possible if you offer like a multiplicity of views in your writing. So that is definitely possible.
Very interesting. So do you see how you're able to respond to these questions through reference to different thinkers? For example, another question. Can we have dialogue in silence?
Yes, sir, I think.
How? Because even if we go the Bakhtin way, there are no voices, or at the most, those voices are coming from within you. How would you argue that you can have dialogue in silence?
Silence would be the opposite of dialogue, I think, almost. You need the presence of voices to have dialogue.
Wittgenstein would say that whereof we cannot speak, thereof we must remain silent.
Yeah.
I also think that silence or vacuum. So if you're talking about silence, then silence is merely a form of communication. So whether we are interpreting it like that, like non-verbal presence is silence, or you are talking about vacuum. So I can sit by a stream and, sit under a tree and enjoy the wind, and I can be silent and they can, yeah.
It's no thought for Krishnamurti. That's actually what silence is.
Yeah, so it's like a mental vacuum. It's not possible before becoming a Buddha, I think. Not in this.
Yeah, that's Buddha. What Buddha suggested, that silence.
Can we have dialogic institutions? Can we say that this is a family which is dialogical, or this is an institution which is dialogical? I mean, Behzad works in an institution which is in dialogue always. How can institutions be dialogical? Yeah, Kulsum.
I mean, I think institutions for education would have to be dialogic by nature, at least. There has to be some level of communication and some level of two-way flowing of ideas for there to be dialogue and
that
just
could
learning.
Be conversation or duologue.
Maybe so, but I mean, there's always the idea in education that both the children and the teacher is learning. So maybe.
Yeah, but we can learn, but still not have dialogue, especially in the behaviorist or cognitive understanding. There may be a sharing of a lot of information. We are learning information. That's it. Come on, try. I'm just
I
perceiving.
don't think so, because the moment you use institutions, the
Yeah.
word institutions, it has its own protocols and rules and regulations. So you are looking for a dialogue within institution or institution being dialogic. These are two.
Being dialogic.
Yeah. So isn't it like it's an oxymoron that you're using?
Well, it may be if you assume that these the foundations of the institution, the norms, rules are fixed and non-negotiable.
I think institutions of yogasana, I think can be considered to be one.
No, but even our institutions, I mean, if policy making is humane, then it can be dialogical. Think about it.
We have to think about
For
it.
example, a nation is no less than an institution. A democracy is also, I mean, okay, let me come to this question the other way. Can there be dialogue without democracy? And by democracy, let me define democracy here for the time being. A politics which gives space to minority voices.
In which case, it would probably be the only form of governance that has dialogue.
Yeah, probably. You see, the idea of dialogue here that I have in mind is not Buber, is not Levinas. I mean, Levinasian ethics. It may or may not be there, but it's largely about multiple voices, giving importance to the needs of the other people. It's Freirean, letting people give voice to their own experiences and raise their awareness to their own systemic oppression. So what I'm trying to teach you here is, or induct you into, is how to argue from a particular stance and how to identify the assumptions of any stance. For example, if I say the relationship of Meera with Krishna, or the relationship of a devotee to the God can be dialogical. So on what grounds would I argue that it can be called dialogical? What assumptions do I have in mind to call such a relationship dialogue? Or a person having dialogue with his pet or her pet. What are the assumptions?
Is the assumption that both people who are taking part in the dialogue, they're both at they're at a level, so they're both together on the same plane, as it were, of
kind of
like both of them need each other's input, both of them need to hear the other person's point of view.
They may not even need, or they may not even be at the same point, but yes, they experience the relationship.
At least as if in that moment of dialogue, they are equal.
They are responding to each other. Yes, that is an assumption. This is a Buberian assumption, by the way.
Can dreams be dialogue?
Can
dreams be dialogue?
Dreams. Yeah, Carl Jung will definitely tell you this. They are dialogical. Because for Carl Jung, dreams emerge from a shared collective unconscious, along with the personal unconscious, of course. So yeah, they can be a communication from the ancestors or from the shared psyche of human life or your own culture.
Or I would rather say that one is at the same time living in the earth and in the heavens. Like it can be finished that way too.
Yeah, the metaphor of uh, uh, getting transported from one to another plane is a good one here.
Would dreams really be considered dialogic though? Because technically you have no, I mean, most of the time you don't really have control over what your uh, input is to the dialogue. It's
Well,
just
they
something
are,
that's sort of happening to you.
yeah, but they are emerging in your unconscious. So there is definitely a relationship. Freud would disagree, of course.
Our mind has a relationship between our brain has a relationship, analogical relationship with the whole universe, or like galaxies together. So in that way, yes, we are constituted of the whole in us. Like the whole is in us.
Yeah, that sort of cosmological assumption would have its own
Yeah,
claims of dialogue in different spheres, of course.
yeah. And since like Levi-Strauss is someone who talks about like the whole society, like which you also talked about through Young, that the whole society is represented in our brain. Like there is an analogy between us and the society, and it is represented in the brain. Every aspect, every structure, our brain structure resembles the structures of the society we live in.
Yeah. Any other thought? Any other idea?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think aloud after listening to, a lot of our colleagues, that, like, are we trying to situate dialogue in the context of, an expression which entails sobriety, peace, humility, lowered voice? I mean,
Yeah.
anger can hyper, hyper emotional realm, can can one initiate dialogue from that vantage point also? If
Absolutely.
so, then how would you like to, like, extend the argument?
Yeah. So often in psychology, especially psychoanalysis and uh, in Indian psychology also, these, and you may have heard it in general also, that one shouldn't say that one hates someone else, because hate is a very strong emotion. And often the thing that you hate in others or love in others is actually what you yourself. So when you say that, there is hate or any negative emotion, actually that's a dialogue with yourself through someone else. So dialogue is, as Buber would put it, it's about relationship. And hate, like love, is an indication of a very strong intimate relationship. So hate is not always rejection of others. Hate is acceptance of the importance of the other person for you. So that entails a relationship. So generally, when people talk about prerequisites of dialogue, there is one such book, I think, by Kazipides. Yeah, by Kazipides, The Prerequisites of Dialogue. They generally talk about these positive emotions, the sobriety, the openness, humility, intellectual humility, and the state of not knowing and all that. But yes, negative emotions are equally strong indicators of a relationship.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts, ideas, reflections?
Dominic, Abrar, Shra, Arafat, we would love you to join the conversation.
Let me give them some more time. So we talked about dialogue, conversation, discussion. Now let's come back to it. What's the difference? Let me give you a beginning. Say conversation is the largest set. Conversation. Now what? Where would you place discussion?
Sorry, sir. Please repeat it again.
I'm saying let's assume that conversation is the largest set. Set theory padhi hai na? There are circles and then you make subsets and subcircles and all that.
If nobody else answers, then I would like to join this conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead.
Kulsum wants to say something.
I mean, I may be wrong, and I mean, this is not always. I mean, people use these words so interchangeably, so it can be a little hard to differentiate. But I would say maybe, like you said, conversation is the biggest circle. And then dialogue is more just like a sort of exchange of ideas, maybe like a flow of viewpoints, like from one person, one being to another, one entity to another. And discussion is not necessarily so much to exchange ideas as to reach a solution or to reach a conclusion. Maybe.
But Akansha would disagree with you. She
Oh.
wants her birds and her pets within the circle of dialogue. And that's not conversation.
Maybe so.
And Imran would say, no, there are no solutions. Forget it.
I mean, the intention is to have a solution. Whether it is reached or not is sometimes a different matter.
I think Arafat wanted to say something.
No, this is a new thing for me. I belong to the IR area. So just I'm learning.
If an asteroid is to fall on Earth tomorrow, is that going to be a dialogue or a message or a conversation?
Can people who don't have a shared language have dialogue?
No. Shared, no is a very strong word, I feel, in this case. Yes, shared language. I guess language then should not just be defined linguistically.
I'm defining it that way. Even facial expressions could be a language. But what if people even don't have that? Say an alien.
Making it more difficult for them. You won't let them breathe.
Actually, sir, we don't know anything about aliens, how they react to the situation. So how can we say we cannot have an interaction or non-verbal conversation with aliens?
Yeah, we may not. We don't know that.
I had the same thought too. I mean, I'm very inclined to think that if we don't share anything in common with anyone. I mean, if it's an alien, we don't share language. We might not even understand their culture. I mean, they might not even have a culture, so to speak. I don't know. So if there's nothing in common, I mean, how can? But I guess, but if we are to accept like the Buberian I don't know, what's that Buberian way? I mean, we would have to agree to that as well, because if we can, I mean, have a dialogue with a non-living entity, I mean, that leaves the door open for a lot of things, and so I was just interested in, like, this, trying to know, in the Buberian sense, would it be impossible to have a dialogue? Like, is that?
No, if
I mean, it seems like
it seems an alien with a prophet or with a avatar. Suddenly, it becomes a dialogue. Maybe it's about attitude only. James, when you said openness, I'm picking from there. Maybe dialogue is all about attitude towards the other.
So maybe if you're saying if there isn't a shared language, the idea that we could divine meaning from what they're saying just because we would like to. In doing so, we could. That's true. That is what we do, at least.
So I would want you to clarify what do we mean by dialogue? Is it some form of give and take? Because if it is some form of give and take that we mean by dialogue, then a farmer has dialogue with us every day.
It's not give and take. It's not an exchange. It's not a negotiation. That's all discussion. That's all in debate. That's all in conversation, maybe. So dialogue, as I said, that there are different versions of it and different understandings of it based on assumptions. Probably for Freire, even negotiation could be dialogue. For political parties, negotiation is dialogue. But in Freire, the attempt or intent would be towards humanization and towards the value of justice, equality, liberty, fraternity, but may not be there so in a political party. So you also have to see, what do you want to do by highlighting dialogue? Do you want to highlight the process? So for example, a board meeting. A board meeting may call people speaking by turn and responding respectfully to each other as dialogue. But for someone that may be just a discussion. So I'm not saying that one form of dialogue is better than other. All that I'm saying is that if you are in a particular context and if this idea of dialogue comes up, you should be able to locate it. That if someone is using the word dialogue, probably this is the intent. And if you are saying that I want to have a dialogue, then what do I mean? So that's the minimum intent of this session from my side.
So is it mean like we need to contextualize?
That's what I said. That's how I begin. There is no B form of dialogue. Rashmi.
So
there could be different. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So there could be different meanings of the dialogue. Means for someone, dialogue could be a dialogue of a movie. For someone, the dialogue could be if you are interacting with each other.
Yeah, but again, for dialogue to actually come into play, you have to have that shared meaning. For example, there is a very interesting scene in which, it's often there in movies. So in an Indian movie, there is a scene where the hero is hurt. I'm talking about the famous Amitabh Bachchan shot. And he's looking himself in the mirror, talking to his beaten self in the mirror and putting a band-aid on the mirror, trying to heal his beaten self. Would you call that dialogue?
Why not? Because intent is, intent is everything when it comes to dialogue. You can have all the discussion.
There is Bakhtinian polyphony? Definitely. Why not?
Yeah. So I was trying to take up this idea of context and positionality, the distance of two subjects and the otherized, So, I mean, dialogue never probably, given that, from today's lecture, what I borrow is that dialogue never is looking for a middle ground. It is looking for fluidity. So if it is looking for fluidity, then the distance from a certain assumed center doesn't matter, which means that both the positions are equal, right? But if we take in the context of the thinkers that you've mentioned today, then it will vary from one to another. So the context and the spatial distance of the subjects or people in interaction who are intending to have dialogue would matter.
Yeah, it definitely would.
So, I started my MPhil with a question. I started with this in MA only. Actually, the thought process started in MA with the question that when I read a text, like any text,
Alia,
Wazir, you can, you can, you can speak after.
Is it, if we speaking, then we can speak.
After
Okay,
Imran is done.
Yeah. So I started with the question, like when we are reading any text, then the text is always repeating itself. Then the text is always repeating itself, no matter how many times I read it. So this was my starting point of that dialogue thesis which I wrote. But later, obviously, I found out that when I'm reading many other texts, then there is a overall dialogue which comes out. But with a single text, there is no dialogue. Like it is always repeating the same. And then, and in another book titled "Speaking into the Air," I read it as part of the thesis only. There it is written that the best form of communication. I might not agree with it, but I'm just telling that the best form of communication that we can have is sex.
You can bring Masuganam.
Yeah.
Well, like what do you
okay, so there are 2-3 things here. One, which Rashmi also highlighted, the proximity of people, of ideas. So if you are often, Alia, please mute.
Yes.
So this whole idea of
taxi.
Just a second. I'm really sorry for this. Yeah. Yeah, now you can continue, Dr. Baniwal.
Yeah, sure. So coming back to the question, yes, the proximity is often considered very important. And this whole idea of this metaphor of lovers becoming one and people arriving at a common position, it's a very common fantasy that it is dialogue only when there is absolute oneness. And which in political terms is quite homogenizing and totalitarian. So I personally was also with the struggle. And there's this very old song. It's quite nostalgic. It talks about let's be strangers again. चलो एक बार फिर से अजनबी बन जाए हम दोनों. So let us be strangers again, and let's not have qualms with each other, and let's meet each other afresh. So these are two different fantasies: becoming one and becoming strangers. Because when the way we engage with a stranger, the freshness, the openness, the tentativeness, the not taking for granted attitude that we have, we lose out on it when we are too familiar. So these are two fantasies of dialogue: absolute oneness and absolute strangeness. And I think this is the continuum in which we swing. When all things are very good, then we want to be one. And but when things are not agreeable or not negotiable or not acceptable, or the otherness of the other becomes too overwhelming and we don't want to engage with the otherness of the other, then we want to be either one or either separate. So these are all in that continuum of absolute strangeness and absolute oneness. So yeah, I think you would, if you are able to place yourself within the continuum, you will find something which suits you, with which you can live your life.
That's a very interesting comment from Imran. And anybody else? Shra? Noor? Abrar? I think it's been too much to think about. Especially for somebody like me, I don't have a background in philosophy at all, so it's been doubly interesting for me.
I came to philosophy through psychology and education. So the thinkers that I refer to are generally educationists, psychologists as well.
Wow. So do you have a science background as well?
Yeah, I did my graduation in sciences, master's in clinical psychology, PhD in education, focusing on philosophy of education, postdoc also in philosophy of education.
Wow. Okay, sir.
For me, the whole presentation and discussion was more Socratic. And I'm not clear if there's a division between dialogue, conversation, and discussion.
So I would say, just to be anti-Socratic and not let you stay with that, there is no universal definition of the difference between them. Even the difference between them would change with the way you contextualize or frame your position.
The other question I want to ask, not really ask, a point I want to make. These concept of democracy, fraternity, and the like, they are very abstract. So I believe for our discussions in the future, we should have a definition, and not just use it in a general way, but if we talk about democracy, what we mean by it. Because for everybody, democracy means different things, and fraternity and so forth. So for our discussion here in dialogue, and bring about peace and what have you, what we consider, how we define what are the salient points we mean by those terminologies.
Yeah. I tried to restrict the meaning by highlighting democracy as a politics which gives space to minority voices. So yeah, similarly fraternity.
Can I say something? I think even if literature or philosophy does not define any differences amongst these three words, and there are various thinkers talking about one aspect of each of these things or the other, these concepts. I think the English language does us the favor of trying to explain in a way that these words are not interchangeable, even though we use them interchangeably. So when it comes to dialogue, there is an internal stance that I am trying to consciously work together with somebody who I do not identify with fully, somebody who maybe I identify as another. And when it comes to discussions can be aimless. They do not have to have a particular end in your mind. And conversation is two-way. Two people might be talking to each other, but they might not really be in a dialogue. You can just listen to respond, or you can just respond to react. But a conversation can be many things. But I think dialogue is more specific, and dialogue has many more qualifiers to it than other forms of discussions or conversations. Okay, I think we've come to the end of a phenomenal session today. It's been amazing, Professor Dr. Baniwal. I mean, you'll be professor very soon, I can tell. But thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself. I'm the alumni coordinator here at InDialogue Foundation. So I am in touch with all the graduates of all the sessions and all the internship programs here. And it was lovely having you here. Thank you so much for joining us. And we really hope to interact with you soon.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And I'm happy to see so many scholars working on a shared idea and engaging with each other, and especially in the context of religion. It seems, how should I put it? I think it is imperative to do so for everyone. So, and I thank Behzad for organizing these courses for our young leaders.
Yeah, he's been working really hard. And Pragya has also joined our team. She's not well today, but Pragya Narang works with us now. Hopefully she will be there in any future sessions we have with you. Okay, sir. Thank you so much. And thank you all the participants for joining us today. See you. Have a good day.